because that's who we are today. We need to make sure that we understand that we need to be here for our students, because guess what? They have choices and they don't need to come here. And guess what? They're not. And what is our role to be able to change and be the student body, to be the university that not only we want to be, but we need to be? We need to make sure that we are providing students with a knowledge base that will make them stewards of their community and leaders as they leave our institution. So where we have been, we've been in a sheltered way of thinking and a sheltered way of looking. And what I'm challenging us all to do today is to think about our own styles and ways of communicating. How can we get out of that which we have done and change to those things which we need to do? And so as we move forward, think about how we can be a more accessible and equitable and inclusive community, that true community of culture of care. You've all heard me say this before. My mom, Betty Pride King Sawyer, used to always say, son, you don't need to look like them to look after them. But you also have to think about, when you're looking after them, that you're seeing through their eyes. Because we could talk about inclusivity all day long. We can talk about equity all day long. We can talk about all of these pieces of diversification, but they don't mean a darn thing if we continue to teach and act the way we have in the past. We have to bring people in and embrace them. And so where we have been can simply be an educator to affirm where we need to go. And so in doing so, we look at those three intentionalities that I talked about on April the 2nd in 2018. And that is that when I talked about the idea of we must strategize, we must assess our programs. If they don't fit anymore, get rid of them. If you got pants that don't fit, you toss them out or blame it on some little picky that came in the middle of the night and took your pants and washed them and made them shrink, but you don't wear them anymore. If we have old ideas, they're like old clothing. Give them away. What we want you to take forward with you are new creative ways of thinking. In order to do that, you must strategize. You must assess your programs. You must think in terms of, how can I do things differently? When we shut down and we had to shelter, folks immediately said, ooh, I need to look at a new way to deliver messages. And there's not a right way. In 1986, when I did my doctoral dissertation, I talked about computer cottages. And unfortunately, I forecasted a day that we would be in our homes, that we would work from our homes, because at some point it would be too expensive for us to be able to work outside of the home. And here we are today, working from our homes. Here we are today, looking at different ways to deliver the message. But some of us are doing that on old, outdated equipment. I'm thinking about where I am today. I'm actually speaking. I have my selfie up. I'm on my iPhone. I also have then my iPad off to my side. I'm recording. I've got all these pieces of technology going on. You know why? Because we need to be able to show our students that we're prepared to engage with them on any level. That's where we're going. That's where we need to be. And so as we take some of those ideas of the past, which are our values and our characters, we want to carry that with us. But the idea simply for all of us is, as we move to the future, we move to the future with the idea of the collective thinking, of strategizing and assessing and bringing better programs and service to our students. The second intention that we speak about, and I've talked about for a while now, and that is the idea that we need to be strategically budgeting. We know what it felt like when we saw that some of our colleagues were in a position that they had to be laid off. We lost 50 people from culinary services, and we lost 19 MPPs. To me, that's a downsizing that was done as a result of lack of work. What we need to be able to show in this new world, in this new space, We need to be able to show that the work that we do is valuable, it's an important, and it will make a difference in the lives of our students. That's what we need to show. We need to be able to let people know that the work that we do is consistent, it's current, and it's valuable, and we are flexible. And that's how we need to start thinking about the work that we do. It may require us to do a little bit more research. It may require us going to a conference virtually. It may require us talking to other people, other institutions, but whatever it takes, it's a win-win. Because the idea of strategically budgeting means that we are aligning with our strategic programs. And instead of the thought of downsizing, we're looking at right sizing. What is the right program for the purpose that we have in our division? What will it cost for us to do those programs that will meet the co-curriculum, which simply supports the academic curriculum? Those are the pieces that we have to start looking at, and that's the second intention, is strategic budget planning and program alignment. And then the third area, the third intention I'm very excited about, because it's one that we talk about, we get excited about it and until we have something else to talk about, and sometimes that goes away. And that's that idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was excited a couple of years ago when we first put together, which I talk about too, that we liberally borrowed from NASP and ACPA, and that's our diversity statement. We didn't really have one at the institution at the time. And I'm so proud of the fact that we have one that we've agreed to in our division that supports all communities, and all communities are welcome. In doing so, one of the things that we didn't have was a person in the office to be able to support those initiatives. Where we have our strategic planning and strategic operation, we have Dr. Laura Monhe-Polson. In our strategic planning and program alignment, we have Anna Reynolds Smith. But the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the idea of making sure that we had the responsibility that we were hiring, that we were program planning, and we were helping to develop our programs around an inclusive mindset, we didn't have a person to do so. Well, this summer, I'm very proud to announce that we were able to have another member of our team join the vice presidential office, and that is Dr. Gerald Jones, is now our interim assistant vice president. He is helping us with our diversity components, and we're really excited that Dr. Jones is part of that thinking process and our three intentions of the office of the vice president. Because in order to be able to provide the services then to you, the students, the staff, to you, the faculty, we needed to make sure that we had a consistent thought process going on in the Vice President for Student Affairs office and had people who would be responsible for those initiatives. So our three intentions then stand as they always have. The difference is now that we have individuals that can completely and holistically work and help us to develop on those promises. One of the things that I was looking at as we were developing this presentation is, where do we want to be, and more importantly, who do we want to be? And so as we're gathering our thoughts and talking to many people from the executive team and also members from the vice president team, these are some of the things that I came up with in terms of these 6 different areas. So where do we want to be? Well, first of all, we need to design for the future. And in designing for the future, we need to do our goal setting. And some of that for many of you may be elementary, but for others, it may not be. But we need to set our goals. What are the goals going to be? Not from when we were on ground, but we now know, since the chancellor then announced this last week, we know that next spring, we also will be in the same virtual environment. So what are our goals for our students? How do we grab those students who are sitting in San Diego, that are in Bakersfield, that are sitting over in Palm Desert? How do we get them engaged on our campus? Because they're still a part of the campus. They may not physically be on ground, but they are part of our family. So how do we get them engaged? And that's part of our goal setting. We also need to start thinking about right sizing versus downsizing. Anna will give us a little bit of information regarding our budget. And that budget information is going to give us information regarding where we are this year, where we will be next year, and even some information as we go beyond. The fact is that it's not a pretty picture, but it's not so bleak that it's insurmountable. And so we need to start thinking about, how do we take the things that you do, the work that you do, and how do we work that together? There's some cross and intersectional pieces that we can work on together. I know that your position description may say one thing, and that's wonderful. Maybe we need to rewrite it. But what we need to do for all of us is how all of us stay relevant in this world of higher education, and that we are teaching our students to be leaders for the future. And so in right sizing is thinking about how we strategically plan our budget to our strategic programs, and then how we assess those programs, and how we do all this with the lens of accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also need to create new ways of thinking and knowing based on our values and our purpose. I know I've mentioned that multiple times today, but there's styles and ways of thinking and styles and ways of knowing. Some of us are visual learners. Some of us are tactile. Some of us just need to see it in terms of reading it and understanding it. Some people need graphs and a lot of color. But whatever it is, we need to figure out what our students need. What is it and how do they learn? And we need to adjust our style or way of teaching, or facilitators of the learning process, to help them to learn better. We also need to, as I mentioned before, decolonize our curriculum. It's so sad when I look back and some of the books that I had to read, the 100 great books, I heard and read that Nigger word in so many of the books that I read. How sad it is that my whole way of growing up was understanding that I caused the Civil War, that I learned that in my past that I was nothing but enslaved and not enslaved, that I was 3/5 of a human being. Those things are hurtful, and you live with them for the rest of your lives. We've got to take that out of our curriculum. We do the same thing with gender and sex, and we do the same thing with multiple cultures within our society. We must stop dehumanizing and figure out better ways of including. And that is already built in many of the curriculums, which many of you studied as you went through your own experiences of education and higher education in America. We also need to start thinking about inclusive ways of putting out information to others. How do we include people in the conversation? The other part that I also wanted to talk about is our wants and our needs. Because as we start looking at these different pieces of how we become a better division of student affairs, and when I say a better division of student affairs, please understand it's not award-based. Whatever we do for our students. Sonoma State is very much a homebody. It feels good. It's like putting a nice blanket around your shoulders and sitting in front of a nice fire on a winter day. Now I'm thinking of the Midwest winter day when there's lots of snow. But we also have so many talented people that are within our division that I want us to share that knowledge. I want us to be able to tell other people what wonderful things that we are doing, because our students get to leave here and they get to tell people who they studied with, and they get to tell people who they learned with. And that's you. Because the majority, as you will know what the research says, most people cannot tell you 3 years later who their faculty members were. But they can tell you that person in student affairs that made a difference in their lives. And that's the work that we do. So one of the things that I thought about as I was talking and thinking about what do we want and what do we need? Well, we want to be a nation, a state, a university, and a division with undeniable value and character. We want to be a division of student affairs that is current, effective, and efficient. We want to be a division that is flexible and resilient. We want to be a division that is caring and accessible. And we also want to honor our traditions of those things in our past, as well as encouraging our innovations. We need, though, we need to reaffirm our values. We need to focus our lens on our students and what they need in order to matriculate and to graduate in a timely fashion. And so these things that I bring to you is what I call the year of Re. And the year of Re, I brought this up in the retreat that I had with our executive team. Because much of what we already have, we have the tools. When you think about it, our planet has no more supplies and no more goods than it did when we were in our Neanderthal stage of making a stone wheel, to now we are placing people on different planets. The materials on this planet have not changed. What has happened is we've learned how to use and make those materials into things that would make us more efficient and effective. It's really an intriguing idea that we created nuclear energy. It's really an intriguing idea when you think about how gasoline has been distilled. But what's so important for us in the future as we grow is that if we don't change our styles and ways of behaving, in November, we could be a different place. We could be a different country. Because the nature and the level of hate that has separated us over the last 3 years is something that we're going to have to figure out. It's not a Band-Aid that's going to fix us. It's going to be that culture of care, belonging, and understanding. It's not the technology that we need. What we're going to need now is the idea of reaching out and leaning into others. So as we think about these next few, and there's about 15 of these, it's what are the restatements of what we need to do to realign ourselves and to become then that nation, that state, that university and division that we've always wanted to be. The first is we need to reimagine our university and division and what we can only be and what we should only be. The fact is that we know what we can be. We know what we should be. So if we know that, then let's work collectively to do that. We need to rethink our process, our priorities, and our policies. We need to reconstruct and resize our organizations to align appropriately with our purpose, our vision, and commitment to our students. We need to reestablish and reevaluate our goals and priorities in our own new virtual environments. We need to redesign our programs to be current, effective, and efficient in this new space. We need to articulate our purpose and vision clearly. We need to realign our values, goals, and our learning outcomes. We need to adjust our programmatic co-curriculum to meet the demands of this brave space that we're in today. We need to reconstitute campus and division committees in order to reflect all members and all divisions of our university community, as well as all people. We need to retool and re-agendize data and our styles and ways of learning and knowing. We need to reorient ourselves by asking the question, why do we do what we do? We need to rediscover the passion, love, and enthusiasm for the work that we do in this brand new setting. We need to refocus our sights on our student needs. We need to recalibrate our financial measures, assessment, outcomes, and diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. We need to reconfirm our allegiance to belonging and that culture of care. And we need to recommit our relationships with colleagues while reconciling our differences with others. And finally, we need to revitalize our ways of visioning, thinking, strategizing, learning, and knowing. As I conclude today, I want you to know how proud I am of all the work that we do. But the work that we do always will center on our students. We have the role and responsibility of making a difference. We're no longer just sitting by the fireplace with a blanket around our shoulders. We have a responsibility contextually to start to help changing the world. And we do that by helping to change and helping our students to understand what it is to make a difference. In marching with students and during some of the protests, it's been invigorating because I've had an opportunity, along with many of you that marched with us, to be able to see what's important in the world, to see what is valued in the world, to understand that all lives matter only when Black lives start to matter, to know that we must mask up if we are to keep all of us safe, as we are closely approaching 200,000 people that have died in this country. It's sad because many of you either have had relatives or you know someone that may have fallen as a result of COVID-19. We have a responsibility in this country to make sure that we don't do what I just heard last night, that individuals that are saying that by November the 3rd, you better have already purchased all your ammunition, because if you haven't, you won't be able to get it on that day. If that doesn't scare the heck out of you, then I'm not sure what will. I always wondered how we ever got into a civil war. I always wondered how brother could fight brother and sister could fight sister. And now I see it. I see it through the ugly rhetoric. I see it of how we treat one another. I see it just with people walking down the street and people hollering out of their cars. When have we become such an ugly group of humans? And so our role as educators, our piece of this universe, our piece of this state, our piece of Sonoma State, we're responsible now. One person can make a difference. And we need to start thinking about how we can help our students become part of this new space. This new space may sound like utopia. It may be Camelot, but it is possible because the work that we do is meaningful. The work that we do is not so much on a continuum because it is focused. It is focused on helping our students to be a better possibility of our world. They are the reason why we do the work that we do, and the work that you also take home with you every day. And in this case, you live at your home with every day. So thank you for the good work that you do. I also want to give a special shout out. I know we'll do it later on the program, but I do want to give a special shout out to those individuals who've been on the ground, who have been doing those special things for us in our REACH program. They've been going above and beyond the call of duty to be able to take care of those students. And although we may not have 3,200 people in housing, those 400 plus students sometimes seem like 3,200. I also want to thank too those individuals who are in student health services in our student health center. They've been there every day working tirelessly to make sure that we're providing students with the care that they need. It's really important knowing that those things are going on a daily basis. And I know we've recognized them in the past, but when you think about that, our programs that we've had on campus with our alternative care unit that we've had on campus, to think in terms of people that have had to move out of the rec center to also assist other individuals in other departments. to see folks that have moved to different areas within our division to make sure that we are helping students get what they need. That's the reason why I thank you. I thank you because you're making a difference. And for all of us, from all of us in the exec team, for all of us on the vice presidential staff, I want to say thank you for the work that you have done. And welcome to our 2021 school year. Blessings to all of you. I know that we're going to have a great year. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Monhe Polson, who will begin giving you a little bit more information in terms of our intentionalities as we move forward. So Dr. Monhe Polson, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Good morning, everybody. Following those remarks, I'm going to share a little bit more about or delve a little bit deeper into our guiding framework for the year. You know, as Dr. Sawyer said, we have our 3 intentions that, you know, really get us back to basics. They get us back to, you know, what are the 3 things or 3 areas that we need to pay attention to this year to be able to advance our work, to elevate our work, and to deal with the uncertainty that that our environment brings. I think one of the questions I asked a lot this summer is, how do you create a roadmap for something that no one's seen before? You know, any of us who plan events, we know we plan for what we can control so that we can deal with the things we can't. And when you're facing a situation where there's more that you can't control than you can, how do you advance? And especially as an organization, how do you advance as an organization? And so I thank Dr. Sawyer for his remarks and how often he's encouraged us to articulate what our purpose is, what are our core values, what are our priorities. And I think when you look at all of them combined, the answer's actually pretty clear. And fortunately, in the Office of the Vice President, we have folks who have been working and thinking all summer and how we can collectively advance these efforts and champion these efforts with the division. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what those areas are and kind of what they're going to include. A lot of it will be familiar to you already. I will come back on after Anna and Gerald have spoken to share a little bit more about the areas of assessment and strategic operations. And then just so you all are aware, because I'm sure many of you are juggling other things while you're in this meeting, we'll go through some announcements at the end. And so, you know, I want to pass it over to Anna to talk a little bit about her area. But before I do, you know, in reiterating those 3 intentions for the year, as we look at how we can advance in uncertainty and deal with disruptions and provide a solid experience for our students, you know, we know we're in difficult financial times, both as an institution and as a nation, that we're dealing with so much uncertainty when it comes to that every decision that we make around how we utilize our resources needs to be done with the utmost care and with our core priorities in mind. As Dr. Sawyer said, as we think about the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion as something that layers onto every decision we make, we also don't want to be pursuing ideas just because they sound good or sound like a way that we could get some money or save some money, right? We want to do it as one coordinated team. And that requires some coordination, some planning, and some excellent communication across our division, and some innovation as well. As Dr. Sawyer said, the things that we're able to advance as a world, as human beings, often come from these kinds of times when there is no roadmap, and we don't necessarily know where we're going to be 3 years from now. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Anna. I think she has some updates for you as far as content information, but is also going to share, sort of her core intention for this year as far as administrative and financial planning. So I will pass it over to Anna Reynolds-Smith.
Excellent, thank you. So we're getting the presentation slide up so that we can go through my portion of the presentation, because it does have some data. And so in the spirit of trying to give people who accept information differently, I'm trying to give some visuals in terms of some of these data figures. So thank you, Doc, and thank you, Laura, for introducing me. As we all know, I'm not sure if I have control of the screen or not. Doesn't look like it. So we'll go ahead and go to the next screen there, Sue, if we can. Thank you. So as many of you have heard before, as a part of the Office of the Vice President for Student Affairs and as a member of the Vice President Leadership Team, as well as the Executive Leadership Team, my role is to support the Vice President and the Executive Leadership Team regarding the division's administrative processes, the fiscal resources, and also those personnel resources, which is all of you. So from an administrative standpoint, I help develop and provide guidance on administrative processes for the division, which includes things like navigating purchasing processes or understanding and providing direction in terms of travel changes, which we did have some last year, actually. As a result of COVID, a lot of these things have kind of been changing pretty rapidly. So we've had to kind of come up with new processes for how to do things. Understanding policies and how those impact our purchasing methods, etc. So in consultation with the Vice President, the VP Leadership Team, and also the Executive Leadership Team, I help set up and communicate these administrative processes. Most of the time, those go through the Executive Leadership Team and then down to the different departments and areas as they see fit. So then that's how we kind of send out that administrative component related to my area. I also help oversee the fiscal component, as Laura had mentioned. It's my responsibility to help ensure the structural integrity of the division's fiscal resources. So again, working very closely with the Vice President, the VP Leadership Team, the Executive Team, and then also the department leads, I help to oversee the division, the area, and the department budget for our areas. So I'm responsible for preparing and reviewing the budget reports for each of the departments and funds. I assist with the budget planning, which, as you've heard already kind of mentioned, we're going to be doing quite a bit of that. We have been doing quite a bit of that, but we're going to continue to do quite a bit of that as we move into this next year. Create long-term pro formas, especially as it relates to those self-support functions, excuse me. And I also oversee the division's one-time list, which I, again, work with the Vice President and the Executive Leadership to develop and establish those funding priorities. And we tie those directly to the strategic plan and what our goals are. Then the final component of my role supporting the Vice President and the Vice President team is the area is for the personnel resources and the structural integrity of the division's personnel resources. So working very closely, again, with the Vice President's office, the area heads and department managers, and HR, I assist with recruitment processes and paperwork processing, provide general onboarding to new employees and managers, etc. So those are really the three components that make up my area to help support that component of the Vice President and the leadership team there. So basically, it's just to provide information to those areas to help us develop those strategic visions and to kind of strategically move forward and tie our programs together with those financial resources that you've heard others talk about earlier today. So in that role, today I wanted to provide you all with a brief campus budget planning update, division budget update, and share some administrative processes and changes that have been made to help address the budget reductions for this year. I know we are all well aware of and kind of have those in the forefront of our mind. The first of several of the slides in this presentation, I just did want to note that they come from a campus budget planning update that was provided at the President's Budget Advisory Committee on September 3rd, I think it was. So a couple weeks ago. But that's where a lot of the campus budget update information is going to come from. I also understand that the University Budget Office is going to be sending out a presentation that they're going to record that will go into these in more detail. But in order to give you a little bit of context in terms of how the division was addressed those budget reductions, I thought it was important to kind of give you just a general kind of campus update. Primarily, this part of the presentation will be focusing on the operating fund. I do realize that we have several other funding sources, which are self-supports are significantly impacted. So I'll talk a little bit about those, but the slides that you're going to see are going to be showing numbers related to the operating fund. But I will talk a little bit about how the self-supports are also impacted by these enrollment and budget reductions that we are experiencing. Then, of course, we have a large component of grant funding that is supported, and I won't really be speaking to that too much today. Many of our grants, though, have been re-awarded, so that is good news for us, and actually many of them have seen some increases. So those areas are a little less impacted than we have seen from the operating fund and the self-support side. Okay, so without further ado, we will move into the next portion of the presentation and go to the next slide. And as Doc had mentioned earlier, it's not pretty, but it's not unsurmountable. I like how he phrased that, but we do feel like it's important to share with you the information. So for this first part of the budget discussion, I wanted to share with you what the enrollment projections look like. So as many of you probably know, this hopefully isn't new information, but just to kind of reiterate where we are at, we have seen an enrollment decline over the last 2 years. We saw a decrease from 1819 and 1920 of about 482 heads on campus, and then we saw another decline in 1920 to 2021 of over 1,200 heads. That results in a 2-year decrease of 1,750, as you can see there on the slide. As you may remember, the decline that we saw that took place from 1819 to 1920, we actually, in last year's budget planning, we actually we took those reductions all in one time because we weren't sure at that time if enrollment was if that was just a blip in our enrollment or if that was an actual trend. And so now we are feeling like the decline in enrollment has become a little bit more of a trend. And so that's why this year we do have to take some additional actions in order to meet the reductions that we are seeing from a revenue standpoint. So the enrollment decline cost implications does for that 2-year period on the operating fund is $9.9 million. It's a $9.9 million impact. For the self-support funds, these are impacted differently than self-support funds are impacted based on headcount because they are primarily reliant on the headcount for their revenues and are more immediately impacted by these headcount fluctuations. So although the operating fund wasn't impacted as significantly last year, the self-supports had actually already started planning reductions in terms of their budget to address what we were seeing in terms of those enrollment reductions. So they are impacted by the headcount fluctuation more so than the operating fund. So reductions for the self-supports do vary by program because some have different ways in which they might be able to get additional funding revenue that is coming into their programs, but they are most largely impacted by that headcount reduction and or for housing, for example, the number of residents that are living on campus. That is a direct correlation in terms of budgetary impact for us. So from a budgeting standpoint, over the last 2 years for those self-supports, they've seen at least a 20% reduction to their budget planning as a result of those reductions in headcount. It's hard to provide a standard response for all of the self-supports, as I had indicated before, because some have different funding sources that can help subsidize those. But generally, most have seen at least a 20% reduction over those past couple of years. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So this slide is talking about the operating fund budget. And primarily it's talking about what the budget was from prior year, which was just under 150 million, as you can see there at the top of the slide. And then it's got some changes that we were anticipating, or at least the University Budget Office was anticipating, in terms of what that impact would be for our budget planning, as you can, our total budget to the campus, as you can see there on the bottom, which is hovering around that $130 million. So some of the impacts from the prior year budget was we have some restricted funds, employee salary increases, and benefit increases. So those are mandatory increases that we would see and need to account for. We also are anticipating an unallocated state allocation reduction. So that is the of around $8.5 million. And that comes from the state funding reduction that we were anticipating. Again, these are all speaking on the operating fund. We're also anticipating the reduction in student tuition and fees of $9.9 million. And that comes from the enrollment decline over the past 2 years. So what you saw on that previous slide, that directly correlates to that $9.9 million. We also are going to be experiencing a redistribution of CSU financial aid for state university grants. From what I understand, that doesn't necessarily go away from the pool, but it goes away from SSU just because we've had that enrollment decline. And then there's some campus budgeted revenue realignments, that $586,000. I believe, and forgive me because these are not I don't have this data stuck in my head so well, but that does correlate to the cost allocation methodology changes that were made and are rolling out for the next 4 years. So the total reductions in revenue is about $8.4 million that we're seeing, which makes the total campus budget for 2021 $130 million. So we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So then that brings us to discussion about the operating fund deficit then, and what we're going to be doing in terms of planning for 2021 budget year. So as you saw on the slide before, that $8.4 million, that total reduction that we were anticipating, you also saw that allocation for the retirement funding to the benefits pool. So that was just kind of an in and out. Again, that $480,000 that I spoke about on the previous slide in regards to the reduction in financial aid. Again, just an in and out and kind of a reconfiguration. And then unfunded mandatory cost increases. There's also some additional benefit increases that were not funded through the state. So originally we had anticipated getting fully funded for the benefits increases through the state, but these are additional mandatory costs that were not funded through the state allocation. So that adds some additional reductions to our overall planning and brings our operating fund deficit to just under $20 million for this current fiscal year. So that's where we're at with that. And then moving to this final slide, this will help giving an idea of how did the campus address that budget reduction. It feels like a big number, and I totally understand that. But the campus is utilizing a variety of ways to address this, the projected deficit of $19.8 million. And they're doing it in a variety of ways, utilizing base and one-time funding to help support this. So just to walk through that quickly, we saw we're moving forward with a pause of the staff equity phase 2 rollout of about $550,000. So that'll be paused for now. We're also utilizing one-time funds from the campus reserve of $1 million. Also, as you all know, we are in a hiring slowdown or a hiring chill, or however you want to refer to that. but they're anticipating some net savings given some positions are not being filled at this time. And so the anticipated savings from that would be $752,000. And that again would be one time to help us bridge these gaps. And then, as you all know, each of the divisions was asked to come up with a 12% reduction by each division. And as you can see there, the divisions have come forward with the funding in a variety of ways. Some have come forward with a mix of base and one-time funds. So you can see how the divisions have come up with that savings at this time. We as a division, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, did come up with our savings in that mixed method as well. So, however, there is a remaining deficit of about $2.3 million, even after all of those strategies that you see above, that the campus needs to identify in order to meet the budget, to fill that budget deficit for this year. So the total base deficit that will end up rolling to 21-22 is $11.6 million. That comes from the total one-time strategies that you see above of that almost $9.3 million, plus the remaining deficit of $2.3 million. That brings us to the $11.6 million that we will need to address as a campus as we move into gosh, I'm getting these numbers are hard to say, 21-22 year. Okay, so now we're going to move into talking a little bit about how did the division, given that kind of overview, how did the division address our budget, our portion of the 12% budget reduction for the operating fund. So our portion of that operating fund reduction was 12%, and it's $755,000. As I indicated before, we did do that in a variety of ways, doing $453,000 of it in base permanent reductions, but then also had a variety, some of it was funded through one-time funds that we will need to figure out how to address going into the next fiscal year. So the first way that we were able to do that is we permanently eliminated the vacant associate vice president position, which comes out to, for salary and benefits, because this does include the benefits, it was $254,000. We also permanently eliminated one of the vacant advisor positions, which comes out to $96,000. We also permanently eliminated temporary help, which we had in the division. Temp help is our budget speak for unallocated personnel dollars. So how that might come about is if a person has been here for years and years and years, and then they retire, and then we re-recruit and fill that position, the individual filling the position would not have received all of those equity increases and those bargained increases throughout the years, so they would be starting at a lower level. And so that difference becomes that temp help or that unallocated personnel. And so we did have funding within the division that we utilized to help address the budget deficit for us and our reduction. We also permanently eliminated operating expenses that were allocated recently to the area heads. We felt that would have the least amount of impact specifically to the departments at this time, and so all of those strategies make up our $453,000 in base reduction. For the remainder of our portion of that 12% reduction, we're utilizing roll forward funding of $192,000, and then we have just over $100,000 that's coming in from a reimbursement for the APC president. As many of you may know, and I know I'm jumping ahead from the presentation, but I think it makes sense here. Edie is the APC president this year, and so she is on leave from her duties in SSU this year, and so we do receive a reimbursement for her time for that work. So that is being utilized to help us with meeting our budget reduction. What is important to note is that the Division of Student Affairs, a base deficit will roll forward for 21-22 of just a little over $300,000. So that is funding that we will need to be able to figure out how do we make that permanent going into that planning year. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said on the previous slide, we don't have to go back though. Self-supports are also experiencing reductions given their loss of revenue due to the decreased headcount and other reductions in revenues, such as less students living on campus, as I had mentioned before, and also things like we're not able to offer our typical Super Kids Camp given CDC guidelines and campus and chancellor's office guidelines at this time. So we're seeing losses of revenue also in the self-support. And although these reductions do vary by the fund and those departments, to address these reductions, self-supports have also been utilizing a variety of methods to address their budgetary needs, such as there have been some reductions in operating expenses in those areas where it's feasible, and then also utilizing reserves. So similar to what we saw with the operating fund, the self-supports are also using a mix of trying to make permanent reductions within their areas where we can, and then also utilizing one-time funds or reserves that are available specific to those self-support programs to help bridge those budgetary reductions as a result of that enrollment decline for those areas. Okay, so I wanted to also talk about a little bit about what the reduction planning strategies we have implemented. So I shared with you on the previous slide exactly some of the positions and how we got to meeting our $755,000 portion of the operating fund reduction. But some of the other strategies, that we've implemented where we can is we've implemented a hiring slowdown process, or a hiring chill, as you might call it. So when positions become vacant, area heads and the vice president very carefully evaluate that position and the needs for the department and the area. And this goes to what Doc and Laura were talking about a little bit before. It's that strategic planning. What do we want to look like? What do we need to look like in order to help support the students and the campus? And so when positions become vacant, it's not just we are going to refill that, but we look at other ways. In some cases, we might look to reassign individuals, existing staff. You'll hear about some of those reassignments in a little bit, who might be experiencing some work slowdown given COVID and our current operating methods. So we're very carefully trying to look at vacant positions and how do we strategically plan so that we can get to how to best support the student. We also implemented new travel processes given the CO restrictions on travel. So we will see there's some administrative changes around that, but pretty much we're going to be seeing some savings as a result of that, at least for now. That's probably considered more of one-time savings. We've also implemented purchasing limits for the division. As you saw when we first when COVID first, when we first moved over to the remote format, there were some limitations that were given, some changes in terms of use of ProCard and those types of things and being able to make purchases. Those have since loosened for the campus. However, as a division, we've decided to keep the purchasing limits for the division. So right now, up to $1,000, an AA or anyone who's delegated that authority is able to pre-approve on those purchases. If the expense is between $1,000 and $10,000, an AVP dean or the area head would be able to pre-approve that expense. And then if it's $10,000 or over, it does require the vice president to officially pre-approve that expense. The reason that we're doing that is just to ensure that we're being fiscally prudent during this time. As you also heard Doc and Laura mention, we really need to be strategic in terms of how we are spending our dollars during this time, and only making purchases for things that are considered critical and essential. Again, are there ways that we can do things a little bit differently that maybe we don't need to make these purchases and those types of And then we're also looking at evaluating collaborative partnerships across the division. You may hear Gerald speak about this in his new role, particularly as it relates to programming, as I know that there's a lot of work going around programming and how can we work together as a team to provide the best programming for our students. But programming is a good example of this and where we can kind of collaborate so that not every department is doing its own thing, but maybe we're doing something a little bit more strategic and together as a whole. But we also want to do those across the division as well as across the campus. So we may be looking to partner, you know, I know that REACH, for example, is working with entrepreneurial activities in terms of helping to provide the packages for the service desk and whatnot. So we're, you know, really trying to be strategic in how do we move forward through all of this. And then the final thing that we're doing, at least right now for planning strategies, is we're starting that budget planning process for fiscal year 21-22 now. That is slightly different than when we would normally start it, but in order to kind of really best plan for this, we're really starting that process now. So the vice president and the area heads will be looking at, as you heard Doc and Laura talk about, right-sizing departments rather than downsizing those departments, and looking at ways that areas can better support the students and the campus given enrollment and the revenue reduction. So for budget planning for fiscal year 21-22, what this will mean is that we might not see that same reduction across each department and area. We saw, you know, each division had a 12% reduction for this year. That might not be the same for next year as we go down this path and really have discussions about what those goals are, what those key components are that we need to be focusing. So we'll need to just carefully review and make decisions based on campus priorities and goals. And these things will be looked at following the guidance that we received from cabinet and, you know, some of those other many changing factors that we are experiencing. Self-supports will also continue working on the multi-year plans. Last year, the self-supports put together 5-year plans that were pretty short-lived, unfortunately, but it's a good structure for us. And we're going to be looking, working with the University Budget Office on trying to develop 2-year plans after we can get some census data and what we can see in terms of enrollment figures and that type of thing that will help us to do that strategic planning and tying those programs together as we've heard talked about earlier. We'll be looking at how we can be more strategic in planning, including looking at how areas can collaborate, innovate, and be more efficient to strategically utilize the limited financial and personnel resources that we have. So as Doc had talked about, really looking at what do we want SSU to look like as an institution? Who are we? What do we want to be in the next 2, 5, 10 years? And how can we set ourselves up during this time? How can we set ourselves up to meet that structure and really meet those goals? So we'll need to consider things like Laura had kind of mentioned and alluded to, doing less with less, you know, not just going for that additional programming because we might get more funding for it, but it's really focusing and looking at SSU's purpose and what does that mean, and putting those resources behind it so that we can strategically set ourselves up as we move into this next period. So again, it's going to take a lot of collaboration as we move through this. To use Doc's word again, it's not unsurmountable, but it is going to require teamwork and really trying to be strategic and refocus again our priorities and helping to really develop the programs to help our students matriculate and graduate is basically the bottom line there. So I think if we can work together as a team, we will be able to move through all of this. So that's my uplifting.
Thank you, Anna. That was very concise, and certainly it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was real, it was honest. Really appreciate that. We're blessed to have you.
Well, thank you. And I will, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gerald Jones so that he can talk a little bit about his component in the Vice President's office.
Thank you for that, Ann. I really appreciate that. It's never easy to deliver budgetary news, so you did a great job of doing that. I do want to acknowledge the congratulatory texts and messages in the chat box about my new role. I do appreciate it. Interestingly, 30 years, or last week marked my 30th year working for the state of California as a public servant. My first 10 years, I worked at Napa State Hospital and Sonoma Developmental Center. And then my first 18 years here at the university working with TRIO upper bound programs. And then my past 2 years leading the case department. And so it's been interesting that over the past 30 years, I have worked with underserved, underrepresented individuals across the spectrum, whether it was mental health, whether it was developmental disabilities, incarceration, low-income first-gen students. It's been my life's work. And so it's very gratifying to now be in this new role to continue the work that I started as a 20-year-old, although I didn't know what diversity, equity, and inclusion was at that time. We didn't use those words, right? But what we did do is work really hard in the nursing industry or nursing field to make sure that our clients were receiving life skills that allowed them to be independent, that allowed them to be able to enjoy the best version of their lives. And it's a lot of the work that we do here at Sonoma State University in the Division of Student Affairs. And so in my new role, I'm still leading the Department of Case and making sure that our students have the resources to persist through graduation. And in this new role is to, really carry out the mission of the Office of the Vice President as it has to do or pertain to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so some of the things that I've been working on are the CWOOF initiative for technology equity. And that's work that I'm doing with our colleagues over in Faculty Affairs, with Dean Karen Snyder, making sure that our students in this new modality have the resources and the tools to be able to participate in their learning, whether it's providing them with noise canceling headphones so that they could mimic as quiet of a learning environment as possible, or having hotspots so they can access Wi-Fi, or having their own computer so they're not having to share with other folks in their household. It's really identifying those things that are going to allow our students to be successful in remote learning. Also working with MSI, which is a new grant that we just received funding for from the Chancellor's Office. And that's the Male Success Initiative. And that's a new program that Andre Bailey is doing a phenomenal job coordinating. And it is intentionally, unapologetically providing services and resources for our male students of color. This is something that is in alignment with GI 2025. Across the CSU system, male students of color are not graduated nearly at the rate that their peers are throughout the CSU system. So this is an opportunity for us to really combat that, to put a structure in place to help these students be successful and timely graduate. Also working with Eric Dixon and Associated Students and Mo Phillips and CWOOF Living on food insecurity. And not just providing students with food, but looking at how can we empower them, right? How can we teach them financial literacy or teach them how to shop and cook on a budget and different things like that that's going to assist them, not just here during this COVID situation, but going forward in their lives. Also working with admissions and strategic enrollment in identifying populations or areas in the university's 6-county service region to figure out how do we make our campus more diverse? What are some of the strategies that we can employ going out to whether Solano County or Richmond or these other areas that have the population that we want, but we haven't been able to attract to Sonoma State University? So being very intentional, strategic in that area. And then excitedly working with Elizabeth Wade, our new Dean for Science and Tech, on a new grant called Genetech, which is going to be able to provide some real intentional STEM focused services for our case students. So that's something that we're really excited about it. But I want to lean back into what Dr. Sawyer and some of the things that Anna talked about you know, the COVID situation. COVID has been in many ways the great distractor and the great disruptor, but it's not insurmountable. And that's the theme of this meeting, is that these challenges, whether it be the fire season, whether it's COVID, or whether it's any other challenge, we together collectively will overcome these different things. And I just want to say to the staff out there that, you know, and I've been very clear with my own staff, is that it's really important that we extend grace to one another, right? There's so many of us that are in our own households, in our own families, are experiencing challenges that our students are also experiencing. But because we're quote unquote the adult in the room or the professional in the room, there's no one really checking in with us. But yet every single day we show up in this space ready to do the work that is necessary for our students. But I also want to make sure that you all are taking care of yourselves and doing the things that keep you balanced. You know, I was talking with someone last night. I was like, I give my all every single day. And at the end of the day, I just crash out. I just laid out on the bed. But the next morning, I'm ready to go again. But for me, the message is, Gerald, how are you taking yourself? How are you being balanced? How are you making sure that as you give, you also receive for yourself? And so collectively as a group, I think it's important that we lean into one another. We have, as Dr. Sawyer said earlier, we have some colleagues across the campus that are no longer here, right? From a human level, that hurts. These are folks that we've worked with, that we've had lunch with, that we've collaborated with, that we've put systems in place, that we've worked to help serve our students together. And so when there's a loss of that, we all feel that collectively and individually on different levels, right? But by the same token, this is also how we are going to help navigate out of this situation together, us leaning on one another, being there for one another, checking in for one another. And again, extending grace, extending grace. That's something that when we had our last fireside chat, Kim Esther Williams and Daniel Malpica and Mike Ezra, they really talked about the need to extend grace during this time. And that's something that I share with our students. A lot of times I hear the students talking about how they're struggling, how the professors aren't doing this or they aren't doing that. And I'm also sharing with the students, you're gonna have some professors that get it, that are going to be able to pivot very quickly. They understand, you know, Canvas and the different technology out there to help you in your learning. And you're gonna have some professors who this is brand new to them and they're gonna struggle with it. But we also have to extend grace to them just as we extend and ask for grace for ourselves. So again, thank you. I'm excited to be here and I look forward to still just rocking it like we always do.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you.
Well, now you're all back with me for the rest of our time until our closing remarks with Dr. Sawyer. But I had shared that I would kind of, we called it a hamburger. I was the bottom bun, Anna was the meat, Gerald's the cheese, and I'm the top bun. And I think that's actually really indicative of what many of you understand my role to be in the Office of the Vice President and for the division. But I wanted to make sure that I clearly articulated some of the things that I think we will be focusing on this year as we take our resource management needs that Anna laid out for us, and we think about our priorities of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and combine those two to advance and emerge as hopefully as a healthier, more stable institution that knows who they are and what we do. And this is my second State of the Division. Last year obviously looked very different, being in person with all of you. But I have been so appreciative of the progress that we've made. I think that the passion we all bring for our work is part of the excitement of getting up every day and doing it again. And so, like I said at the outset, thinking about our three intentions, our resource management, our diversity, equity, inclusion, what's our strategy around all of this? How are we going to make sure when we're all sitting on computer screens and then going to our kitchens to make lunch, or trying to be careful about our office environment when we're on campus and go home and think about how we continue to find that balance every day? How do we make sure we're all moving in the same direction? How do we link arms and walk together? And I have been glad to see that the priorities that we've set out are student success as just the beginning of what we do with our students, the academic excellence and innovation, how we cultivate leadership, and work with our students and our community to have a transformative impact, are still very much so the direction we're headed and where we want to be. And I love that we have set such a strong foundation for student success that as we've had to shift gears, we've been able to rely on a lot of that infrastructure to address the needs of our students. As you all know, my area for the division is really responsible for the structural integrity of what we do. And the way that's actualized is often through things like communication, professional development and training, of course, research and assessment. And in addition to all of that, recognizing and celebrating the things that we do, the people that we are, the contributions we're making to the world, and appreciating one another for the value that we add to the institution. And I don't think those things are going to change this year. I think what they look like and how they manifest themselves, I really do like Anna's phrase, doing less with less. It eases my anxiety when I hear that, because it helps me think about the core priorities and what's most important. We talk a lot about the community of care, and I think that one of our challenges as a division has been our community. The culture of care in our division has often come from these kinds of meetings where we stay after and we talk with one another, or we have a space to think about the challenges, or we grab coffee and vent about a challenge that we're facing, or talk about a success that we had. The more time we spend on Zoom, the harder it is to even have the energy, at least for someone like me who's a little bit more introverted, to call a friend later, to have that additional conversation that I know is going to fill my heart, but also drain my energy. So I think as we advance this year in this, like I said before, this roadmap for something none of us have ever done, we do get to lean on the things that we bring to our roles. You'll see in a minute when I go through all of the announcements and accomplishments that people have achieved this last year. We are a rich body of professionals who are doing great things. And one of the most wonderful things about higher education is how diverse institutions are, and how they're set up and designed, and how they accomplish the role of educating our communities can look very different. And I think the more that we stay engaged with the national conversations, the more we stay engaged with our professional organizations and the challenges that we're grappling with in our areas, and reaching out to our professional communities will allow us as an institution to innovate, to bring ideas to the forefront, to contribute to the field, but also bring the work that's happening in the field back to Sonoma State. So in essence, some of the things that we'll be working on this year, many of you are already a part of over the last semester, the spring semester, and the summer, we got a number of committees underway, and those committees are comprised of folks across the division contributing to our plans in these particular areas. We have a communication committee, we have a research and assessment committee, we have a recognition and celebration committee, we will have a professional development committee, and a policies and procedures committee. And what that looks like depends on what you all bring to that space. So many of you who have been in these committee meetings have noticed that I'll show up, our co-vice chairs will show up, and we'll talk about some of the challenges we're facing. But even as the time on our committees has evolved, our purpose hasn't changed, but how we address that need has. So some of us have moved to meeting every other week, some of us have moved to meeting once a month. It just depends on where we are and what we need as a division. And so I'm excited about continuing that committee work. I encourage you all, if you're interested in being on those committees, to talk with your area head. It is an intentional group, and there are some responsibilities that are involved in being a part of those committees. But it's also a great opportunity to understand more about our division, understand the work that's happening in other areas, and to think about how we create synergy in our work, avoid duplicating efforts, and advance the areas that we need to advance. As far as communication goes, many of you have probably noticed you've been invited to join the Division of Student Affairs page and engage. I encourage you, if you haven't already, to accept that invitation. There are a number of places that we could have built a virtual community. We have a wonderful tool in Engage, and it allows us to post our division meetings or to open applications for professional development opportunities. It could be a wonderful space for folks to share resources or ideas or needs. And so as the communication committee continues to grapple with what is our best approach to communicating in this new environment, that would be one of the pieces that I'd love for you all to take away from my area, from my time, is that is a space that we will be working to create, and it is what you make of it. So please join, and we'll see what comes of it. I think I've been pretty honest that I'm not the most technologically savvy person. I love technology. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. So I do want folks to contribute and to embrace some of the spaces where we can continue to be a community within the division, and build synergy in our work. As far as assessment goes, of course, we have even more questions than answers right now. We want to know how our students are doing. We want to know what they need. We want to know how our staff are doing and what they need. And all of that demand on people's time requires intention and respect. So please, as you're able, participate in those discussions around what you're seeing, what you're learning, what information you have, what you don't have, and how we can obtain it. I see many faces on this screen that I see in meetings throughout the weeks. And so those are great spaces to bring up those ideas, and know that I'm here to help you all through that process, especially this year, but always. And then finally, from the training and professional development lens, there are a lot of new skills we need to gain to be able to deliver for our students. We need to advance our own skills and professional abilities. And then in addition, we need to share knowledge with one another, what we're learning, what we're seeing, and continue to contribute in the ways that we have. So, so stay tuned for some of that as our committees provide those roadmaps for that space. The last thing I wanted to say is that we're going to recognize and celebrate each other. And one of the challenges with our environment is that sometimes celebration feels weird. It feels wrong, or like we're ignoring some of the other things that are happening in our space. And so we want to do that with that sensitivity in mind. We want to continue to recognize the folks who are giving their all and celebrate the fact that we all just keep showing up. And, you know, you all know my daughter's around here and she's growing and changing, and that requires me to grow and change as a parent and a professional along the way. I'm so grateful for those of you who are in that space as well and can relate and empathize for, you know, those of us who have pets barking in the background or meowing, you know, those of us who have partners, those of us who are dealing with loneliness or just isolation, and the lack of things we usually did to be able to create community. These are all things that are just as much a part of our professional space as all of the other things I mentioned before. So I think the recognition and celebration space is so important. We have our fireside chats. As a committee, we're hoping to create a couple other different kinds of opportunities for us to recognize and celebrate the work we're doing. And as Gerald said, heal and find those ways to recharge, share with one another, and create those spaces so we can carry on. Before I move into the announcement section, so to wrap up my top of the hamburger bun, I just want to say the Office of the Vice President is here for you. Gerald and Anna and I are so excited to find the synergy in each other's work, to manifest the spirit of what Dr. Sawyer has put into this division and puts in our hearts. Sue and Rachel are the glue that will hold it all together. And you all are the hearts of our work with students every day. So thank you, all of you, for being here today and for continuing to work with all of us, and for being incredible and amazing individuals. With that said, I'm going to move into the part where I talk about all of you and all the amazing things that you've been doing and will be doing here in the future. So I'm going to let Sue get our slideshow back up. And we will start, of course, with our recognition this last year, 2 years in a row as the most promising place to work in student affairs. We're going to go for it again this year. The thing I would say about this award is that it is just as much about the work that we're doing as it is the work that we're planning to do, where we're going, how we're elevating each other. And so, so I hope that we get to claim 3 years in a row this next year. But I'm so glad that this continues to be indicative of our commitment to changing with the times and changing with our students and continuing to provide excellent care. Can move on to the next one. Reiterating a special thanks to our folks who are on campus this semester. We, in some ways, envy you and in other ways don't. it's hard work, and the care that you're putting into the work with our students who are on campus is exceptional. So thank you. Reiterating our special announcement about Gerald joining the Office of Vice President team as the interim AVP for Student Access and Educational Equity. I have to say it is huge for me to have a partner in this effort again, to have another colleague to advance the work that we're doing and to pay attention and to bring his rich experience in focusing on these efforts to make sure that they do, that they are integrated into all of the work that we're doing. In that same vein, the Hub Cultural Center has moved to the President's office, and the elevation of their work speaks to, I think, our university's commitment in finding innovative and different ways to advance our efforts of equity in institutions of higher education. So we're excited for those colleagues, and I know everyone who has typically collaborated with the Hub continues to do so. So it's amazing to see that work elevated to the Office of the President, and we will continue to see the great work that they do. All right, even more. So we have Cookie Garrett is the co-chair for the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee for WASTE this year. And Dr. Ryan Henney had a presentation accepted around the work that we've been doing at Sonoma State: urban fires, death, and power outages with looting, oh my. So congratulations to the two of them. Oh, with Stacy Murray, fabulous. Mendel Murray graduated with his MBA from the University of Bridgeport. Vero Gonzalez graduated with her MS in counseling from San Francisco State University. So congratulations to the two of them for completing their master's degrees. Marissa Chavez had 2 publications accepted in journals in our field, the Journal of Latinos in Education and Journal of Student Affairs Research and Practice. So feel free, I'm sure, to connect with her and pick her brain on the work she did on those articles. Audra submitted a presentation for NASPA Western Regional Conference that will be led virtually. And Kayla submitted a presentation for the California Collaborative of Advising and Counseling Conference, which unfortunately was canceled. I'm thinking as I'm reading through these, we probably need to have a poster presentation or some kind of brown bag series so that folks can share the wonderful work that, that they would have been doing or will be doing in these virtual spaces. And continuing on, Jamie Grosser had a presentation accepted for the California Collaborative Advising and Counseling Conference around the inclusion toolbox, what it takes to advise at California's diverse institutions. We have a couple folks in starting advanced degree programs this year. Yadira Sanchez received her MA in Organization and Development from Azusa Pacific College and enrolled in the EDD program at Fresno State University. Congratulations, Yadira. Raina Penning enrolled in the MA in Education, Curriculum, Teaching, and Learning program at Sonoma State. Naive Tapia enrolled in the MS in Family and Human Development program at Arizona State University. And Edie Brown, our Student Affairs Program Coordinator, started her EDD program at Fresno State this semester as well. And as Anna mentioned, she is, unfortunately for me, but fortunate for her, on leave of absence to fulfill her duties as the president of the Academic Professionals California Union, which is extraordinary to have someone from Sonoma State in a leadership role like that. And I know she misses her colleagues greatly. Several others, happy to say, enrolled in advanced degree programs. Erica Black enrolling in the EDD program at San Francisco State University. Cookie enrolled in the ADD program also at San Francisco State University. Rose Calzonci enrolled in the Masters of Public Administration with a concentration in Public Financial Management at CSU San Bernardino. That might be it as far as advancing education and degrees. There may be more. Congratulations to everybody. I'm so excited to see the things that you're learning and ideas you are having through your coursework and your dissertations. Know that we're all so proud to have so many folks, investing in their futures, and can't wait to see what that brings to the university. And while Kelsey's picture is up here, you've probably been able to read Student Success and Advising named Kelsey Bensky Career Advisor as their Employee of the Year in Student Success and Advising. So congratulations to Kelsey for that, that recognition this year. All right, we have some new employees. Welcome, Brian Juarez, our new outreach support personnel in Upward Bound. We have a new campus partner, Brittany Kern. Brittany is actually with Verity Intervention Services, but is collaborating with us this year on a grant, working with Susan Polito as a confidential advocate for students. We have two folks, as you saw in a division announcement that came out a couple weeks ago. We have two folks in new roles. Tracy Eaton is our interim director for the Student Health Center, and Margot Brown will be our interim lead physician for the Student Health Center. So congratulations to the two of them for moving into those new roles. We have a couple, as Anna had mentioned, a couple of folks who have been reassigned within the division into different roles. We wanted to make sure you knew who they were and where they are. Shannon Smith is our director for TRIO training programs, and Sayedi Aragon Garcia is our administrative coordinator now for academic talent search. Lou Vega has moved into a new role as a professional academic advisor, as has Ryan Walsh in Student Success and Advising. And Reed Matheson is now our care team coordinator in the Office of the Dean of Students. Retirements. We've had some folks retire this year, which is good for them and sad for us. David Ferguson, Director of TRIO Training Programs, will be retiring October 1st. Kathy Anderson, as you know, retired as of September 1st. Dr. Pat Dreyer as well, and Tony Boraccia will be retiring this year. And my favorite, some new baby additions to our division. Alma Sanchez Carreno's baby, Leon. And Alma has been back, but I don't think we ever got to officially congratulate Alma for that addition to her family. And I've loved seeing Leon on some of our meetings. That's been awesome. And our three most recent additions, welcome everybody. Welcome Arlie and Ella, Jamie and Shelby's twins, and McKenna Fate, Stacy Murray's new baby. Gosh, I think I'm done now. So much joy. Going back to what I said about the recognition and celebration, it fills my heart to get to celebrate the wonderful things that people are doing, and to think about how our community is growing and changing, even in such interesting times. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Sawyer to provide some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Laura. What a wonderful presentation. This one steered a little bit away from the norm of what we've done the past two state divisions, but I really wanted to make sure that we could show how important it was in terms of the work that we are trying to do on behalf of the division, so you'll know what's going on a daily basis. It has always been our point to be open and transparent. I've loved reading the chat hugs. It really does show that the work that we do in terms of building a culture of care and having a culture of care community is absolutely amazing. And I too just love seeing the babies and all the bundles of joy. It's interesting the contrast when you see those individuals that are retiring and those individuals who just entered the world. And so thank you for that very caring presentation. I would be remiss if I did not call out our wonderful Sue Hardesty and the work that she puts in each time into these wonderful PowerPoint presentations and making sure that we have something for the division so that you all can see those ideas, thoughts, and actions. I will also provide to all of you at the end of this the points of read, so that you can have that. If you didn't or were not able to keep up with how fast I went, I will certainly have that for your edification later on. I also want to thank Anna and Dr. J for the work and the time and the effort that they put into structuring not just today's presentation, but making sure that we have a clear, concise way of doing the work that we do. As Laura pointed out, her work certainly does center around that strategic operations. But as you heard in each one of those pieces, the strategies are important when they are able to show what we do in the curriculum and the co-curriculum. But you have to have budget and a fiduciary way of being able to look at those pieces to be able to align the budget with our co-curricular programming. And all of that is for naught if we don't have then access and the diversity and inclusion of all of our students. So all these pieces tie in so beautifully and sequentially. So I say again to you, thank you for all the work that you do. To see those verbal hugs, to watch how you all have chatted each other up, really shows that we are in this culture of belonging. We do have to reach out to each other just every now and then, just when you're thinking about somebody. Shoot them a text message, shoot them an email, because that may be the one that they just simply needed that day. Think about that student and how you can engage them, how we can bring them in. Remember, we don't want to lose that idea that as we are in a new way of thinking and a new way of doing, how can we reach out to those students and make a difference? I too want to thank the Children's School, which I didn't say earlier, as well as BNI. The Basic Needs Program has been essential. And I don't know that we've mentioned this in other meetings, but if we have, it doesn't hurt to mention it again. But I really appreciate President Melissa Kadar, who is a president of our Associated Students, who over the summer agreed to take on basic needs in the Associated Students as one of their many programs. That was really key for us because we just weren't in the position that we could do so. I want to call out our partner because Associated Student really is that as a corporation. They have partnered with us and it's something that I truly appreciate. Eric Dixon, I really appreciate the work that you've been putting in with BNI, working also with Ryan, working with Gerald Jones, as well as others within the division, but to making sure that our students are getting fed. Because when we first aligned housing, we thought that we would have food. And then all of a sudden we realized we didn't have food. And so with the good works of all these wonderful people in our leadership group that have worked diligently to make sure that our students are getting fed. And for those students who have gone into isolation, we have a staff person who's with our Lobo Hugs program that is making sure the students are being checked on and that they too are getting food and the medicine that they need in order to recuperate. So we have a lot of silent partners that are out there doing the good work. And so I do want to say thank you. And yes, thank you to Reed, who is actually going to those doors, who is checking out those students, who is making sure that they have what they need. I didn't want to forget those programs. And the one that I have to also mention, the Children's School. You've heard people say things come in the 11th hour. Well, this one came in the 11:59 hour because they were still waiting for all the work. Fortunately, Leah Thompson and her wonderful teaching team and staff were able to get ready to go as soon as the president signed off and as soon as everything was accounted for, we were ready to open. I have to say that was probably one of the more miraculous openings I have seen in my career, because we were ready to go. We just sure when we were going to be able to go. So I wanted to make sure that I thanked all those individuals who were on the ground prior to us opening to try to get things together. The final thing is this, is that I hope that all of you then stay healthy. Please stay in contact with one another. We need each other. And just every now and then, as I said earlier, just say hi, just touch base, thank somebody for the work that they have done and appreciate them, because we never know. You just never know. And I have to say one thing in closing is that one of my things that I love to quote, and that is, if you look at something as it is, it will only get worse. But if you look at something as it could be, then ultimately it will turn out as it should be. These things are not insurmountable. We have overcome worse, and we can do it, because no one travels alone well. We always travel together better. So thank you all very much for all that you do for us. And thank you, wonderful team. We couldn't do it without you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all. Blessings.
Make good choices, everyone.